Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. I just went and saw Napoleon. First time I've been in the movies in forever. And overall, it was a pretty good movie. Historical accuracy wise, I don't have too much to say. My knowledge on Napoleon is literally just what I remember from high school and a quick skim of Wikipedia. It seems like they got the broad strokes right. I saw people online pointing out that they wouldn't shoot the pyramids because he had like an obsession with architecture and stuff. So I'm sure there was embellishment and that sort of thing. The only thing that I didn't really like was how they portrayed his interactions with people. But even that, it sounds like there's a lot of contradictory opinions and different evidence and all sorts of things. I mean, it was over 200 years ago, so documentation wasn't what it is now, obviously. And what I mainly didn't like about it in that regard was that they really portrayed him as kind of a simp to his wife. And I'm going to be getting into spoilers, just a heads up. So if you don't know stuff about Napoleon and you don't want to be spoiled, now's the time. So his wife cheats on him like pretty quickly in their marriage, and he cheated on her, and they acknowledge that they both did that, and that all sounds historically accurate. But they made their relationship like really unstable and toxic, and maybe that is fair, I don't know. But they just kind of made him come across as really weak and simpy. And even when he was leading the military, like he had good presence, but I couldn't tell if they were trying to frame him as a good leader or not, which, I mean, obviously I'm just going off of the one watch through in the theater. Maybe a rewatch would change my mind on that. But the battle scenes, I really like the way they were done. And as far as the big events in his life that applied to this movie, it seems like they were generally accurate. They did leave a lot of stuff out because, I mean, it's only 2 hours and 38 minutes or whatever, and he's a very accomplished person and historical figure. So it kind of felt like a long movie, but also rushed. Sort of in the same way that Oppenheimer did, where there's really a lot going on just throughout the whole movie because they're trying to fit so much stuff in from a guy's life. I mean, I couldn't even imagine trying to get my own life down to a 3-hour movie, and I'm a pretty boring guy and a normal guy overall. But, you know, when you try to take into account the stuff that's important to people, there's a lot throughout your life. So it's just one of those things with these movies based on historical figures. But yeah, Joaquin Phoenix and Vanessa Kirby, who plays his wife, were the main two. And there's a bunch of other characters, again, kind of like Oppenheimer, because he's just interacting with so many different people throughout the movie and throughout his life. But those two get a ton of screen time, and you really get a lot of time with those two, like behind the scenes and not their public figure. And they both gave really good performances. Joaquin Phoenix was a little bit weird to me because of what I mentioned of how they made him seem like kind of unstable and weak. So there's a couple parts to me where it felt like similar to his performance in Joker, but 200 years ago in France, where he's coming off as almost like a little bit out of control and manic. And it's actually interesting, even just skimming his Wikipedia, some people called him authoritarian, while others said that he was really good to the French people, but then more brutal with his enemies that he conquered. Some people said that he was misogynistic and had an inferiority complex. Others seem to think he was really arrogant, and it's unclear if he was doing it all this conquering for himself or for France or for glory or what, or peace. So it makes it interesting in the sense that it doesn't seem like there's one definitive narrative like there would be of someone who was alive 30, 40, 50 years ago. But I think it's kind of a weird choice that it seems like they wanted to fit in a bunch of the different perspectives historically. So then his character ends up kind of being this really erratic mishmash of almost seemingly different people. And that's a pretty subjective thing. I don't know if I like that or not. Because on one hand, you know, you do like if they're going for historical accuracy, but if there's also not a clearly right historical narrative, then do you just pick one and stick with it? And then you're portraying him in a certain way? Or do you pick a bunch and then he comes off as kind of all over the place? I don't know. I mean, obviously, in general, my perspective would be if you want to learn about historical figures, don't do it through Hollywood. But yeah, the movie overall seems to want to portray him as this kind of toxic, glory-hungry, sexist. Maybe he was, I don't know. And then at the end, there's a footnote about how many men died because of his wars and stuff. To me, it seems like the movie wants you to think like he was a terrible person. I don't know if you could say complicated or not. To me, it seems like that's the direction that they were going. And again, maybe he was, I don't know. I mean, who knows? It doesn't seem like anyone has a really clear-cut case for why. At least at a glance. Maybe someone with more historical knowledge could really dive deep into why they think what they think. And I'm sure somebody will, who's much more qualified than I am. But overall, I thought it was a good movie. The fights were really well done and very cinematic. The performances of the main two characters were really good, even though I thought Joaquin Phoenix's felt a bit weird and out of place at times. Overall, it's definitely the best movie I've seen in a while. It's always interesting to see that kind of stuff, brought to the big screen, and just sort of this portrayal of people that you can't otherwise see video of. I think it's interesting that the movie portrays him as this kind of authoritarian, brutal warmonger. But then there was also stuff that he did regarding like civil rights for French people and fixing their education system. And it sounds like he had a pretty big influence on the concept of having like local governments, so mayors, governors, and up type thing. So it seems like he was a pretty mixed bag. They really focused on him as a person though. So you didn't really get to see any of that stuff in the movie. And there's also some things where he quelled uprisings and all that kind of stuff doesn't make it in there. I think that's just the thing with these movies like this is you get sort of a flattened out version of what the director thinks is important. Maybe it'd be better off doing a 10 episode series, but then could you get an actor like Joaquin Phoenix? I don't know. Or do you want to commit the time to it? Obviously having to film 10 hours worth of material is a lot different than 2.5. And the budgets are going to be way different when you're doing these big, pretty epic battle scenes. And one thing I also thought was really hit and miss was the soundtrack. And in certain points, like you're kind of seeing the end of the French Revolution, obviously, because it's Napoleon's story. And you get this really over the top music when they're doing the guillotine and stuff. And the courts are going kind of crazy and they're getting rid of Robespierre. And then there's a couple other scenes too where I felt like the music was super over the top. And I was like, that's an interesting choice. And it didn't really work for me. But then during the fights and stuff, the music was good because it was still over the top. But when you have big battles on screen, I think you can afford to get away with that a little bit. Overall, I thought it was a good movie, but there was definitely some points that I thought were hit and miss. And it definitely felt like 2.5 hours. They fit a lot in. So it's not like the Batman or something where it feels like you're watching people walk for 30 seconds and that type of thing over and over to really extend the runtime. This is like just bam, 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 bam. Like you're just getting dates and dates and dates. And then they use the letters between him and his wife for him to give some narration. So you can change the context of what's going on because it's doing a time jump for a couple of years or a big event jump to a new part of his life or whatever. So they really packed it in, but yeah, it still felt a little bit long. I don't want to go too long. It's Thanksgiving. Hopefully you have a good Thanksgiving and get your fill of turkey and whatever else. If anyone else is seeing it, I'm curious to see what you think because I actually haven't looked at any reviews for this. I haven't seen any YouTube reviews. I haven't looked at Rotten Tomatoes or anything. So overall, I have no idea what the public perception is right now. That's it for me for this one. See ya. Thanks. Gobble, gobble.